Hello and welcome to Maiden, Mother, Matriarch with me, Louise Perry. My guest today is Lane Scott, a Catholic homeschooling mother of 5 and also a writer. Her Substack is Matriarch Goals. She also writes for a number of other outlets, including The American Mind. We started by talking about a recent piece she wrote for The American Mind called The Mother's Gauntlet, which I loved, which was about the challenges of rebelling against the mainstream as a conservative, which many conservatives are now in the perverse situation of having to be the rebellious ones and the nonconformist ones because the mainstream is so anti-conservative in many ways. In the extended part of the episode, we also spoke about tradwives on social media and the image of the tradwife, and practical tips on how to set about homeschooling and living a more rural way of life, and the practicalities of actually rebelling for real. That extended version of the episode can be found at louiseperry.substack.com, where you can also find the bonus episodes I do fortnightly with my husband, the MMM chat community, and the whole back catalogue of past episodes. Enjoy. Many of you will know that Christianity is a subject of fascination for me, and the role of Christianity in shaping the modern world is a theme I return to again and again on the podcast. My view is that we can't really understand ourselves or understand the world around us without getting to grips with it, which is why I'm very glad to put you towards a new online course called 321. It's an introduction to Christianity that's imaginative, thoughtful, engaging. It assumes absolutely no prior knowledge. It's presented by the wonderful Glenn Scrivener, who has been a guest on the MMM podcast previously, and I've also been a guest on his show. Glenn presents 8 video-led sessions, which are based around some beautiful animated stories that illustrate the Christian message. You can check it out for free at 321course.com/MMM. Just enter your email, choose a password, and you're in. There's no spam, there's no fees. Just visit 321course.com/MMM. So, Lane, I really wanted to get you on the podcast because I read this gorgeous essay that you wrote for the American Mind called The Mother's Gauntlet. I was looking for like a quote to read out to sort of introduce readers to it, but I couldn't really find one that did it justice because it really just works as a full essay, and I would really urge everyone listening to go read it because it's like a very Maiden, Mother, Matriarch piece of writing. Okay, it's great. Yeah. Do you want to start by maybe summarizing, not just summarizing your argument, but also, I guess, summarizing your family life and your professional life and how you've got to this,
Yes.
place?
Okay. I grew up in a small town in the rural part of California. So I'm within driving distance of San Francisco and Lake Tahoe and Yosemite, but I'm in a rural area. So I grew up on my parents had land, and my mom taught at the public high school, and my father was an atheist, and we were just sort of ordinary people. Went to Congregationalist church, which is mostly political and kind of not more kind of like Rotary Club or something like that. And then my dad found an ad for Thomas Aquinas College in National Review magazine and thought that the liberal arts would be a good thing to send his kid to. So I went to the summer program, and Thomas Aquinas College is in Southern California near Ventura, near the beach. And I went to their summer program, and it was just, I had never been exposed to anything like that before. Just the Socratic method of discussion, the great books, and the way that they do things there. But I wasn't Catholic, and so that part kind of creeped me out. But I decided to go there because I thought, this is what I want to do. So I went there, and sophomore year, I converted. After, what you do there is you kind of read the whole Bible freshman year, and I think my conversion wasn't really intellectual. My intellect supported it. Like, I already believed in God. So the problem wasn't believing in revelation or anything. It was just kind of seeing the way the Bible is laid out, the covenants, different things, and thinking like, what I do. Actually, my atheist dad was like, isn't what you do Catholic light anyway? Like, why are you worried about this? Like, just don't worry about that. Just go to school. And I found that to be kind of true. So it was a difficult thing to, I protested the first year of class and brought a children's Bible to theology and, just stupid stuff like that. And then eventually I thought, like, well, I have to stop having this tantrum and, be a serious person. So I converted there. And then, I met my husband at Thomas Aquinas College. He went to an engineering school for engineering first, and then so he was older but behind me by a year. And then I graduated, and I thought we were still dating, and I thought like, well, I don't. I was kind of still scared of Catholic life and having a lot of kids, and wasn't in any hurry to to start. And so I thought, well, I really like school, so I'm going to continue to go to school. So I went to Claremont Graduate School in their political program. Which is it was and in some ways still continues to be really good, especially if you're mildly conservative. And so my husband did a year later, we proposed and we got married. And then after I was done with coursework, I set it up so that I just pushed everything. So I finished all my coursework before we were married, because I was worried about, I thought like, well, obviously I'm immediately going to get pregnant. Actually, it took me a year to get pregnant with my first. And so by that time, I think I was doing qualifying exams or something. Most of it was done by the time I had my son, which I mentioned in the article that, and I started seeing how different and difficult daily life as a mom was going to be compared to school, compared to where you go and they give you gold stars and they say you're doing a good job. And there's a lot of people there and there's always some goal to meet. And so the article sort of takes place in that time period in my mind, just because I was talking to some girlfriends about why staying at home is not more desirable, why people choose not to do it. And I actually don't think that it's mostly economic. I think people say that, or what they mean when they say that is that they can't imagine themselves doing that unless they had a lot of money to make life really comfortable. But in fact, most of the stay-at-home moms I know are not wealthy. In a rural area, most of the men are in the trades, and they're comfortable, but they're not wealthy. And so it seemed to me that, just given, my mom worked full time her whole life, given that experience, it seemed to me that it was worth looking at what actually is going on when people decide kind of how they want to, and women in particular, how they want to do their life. And I had put a lot of time and energy and money into my degree, and I loved working, I loved school. And my husband and I, when we were dating, would talk about, well, maybe we'll both work part-time, or maybe we'll both work 30, 35 hours. That was kind of always our goal, is like, if we can both work, maybe there would be enough overlap. But in general, even with all that, and the most helpful husband, I mean, my husband cooks. He's he's probably better with discipline. He wants children. He's very excited. He doesn't have anything in his life that he's as interested in as his children. Um, Even with that, it's the mom. I mean, you're going to be home with them most of the time. And if you're not wealthy, just economics wise, you're going to favor the worker who doesn't have to take big breaks, who can just, it for us. And I think for many people, you go into it thinking, well, we'll both work part-time. And we have. I mean, I've worked most of my marriage. I just don't make anywhere near the amount of money per hour he does, well, first of all, men are just able to compartmentalize and focus, especially if the mom is able to kind of just take everything off their plate, which you're able to do if you stay home. Then he almost has an unfair, I mean, this is what feminists say, an unfair advantage of the workplace, because he doesn't have to go to the DMV and he doesn't have to go to doctor's appointments. He's completely focused on that. It can make a lot of sense. It's publicly, public policy wise, people don't like that. They want the man to do more, because they want men in the workplace to be on equal footing with women in the workplace. But if you have a stay-at-home mom, you can make that family unit, if you think of it in terms of the family earning money, which I think you have to if you're going to be a stay-at-home mom. I would recommend that. If you think of it in terms of the family making money, you sit yourself down and you say, how can we make the most money in the littlest time possible? And it most of our lives, it's ended up something like, well, you can make way more per hour and you don't have to nurse and be pregnant and have an infant. And so the economics of it are pretty clear. So but all of this was kind of nebulous, and I just didn't understand how it was going to work when I was a young grad student and I had my first baby when I was 25. And so we didn't want to live in the city. Neither of us are city people. My husband's from a kind of like a horse ranch in Arizona. He's kind of a cowboy. And so we moved up to where I'm from. That's where we are now, Northern California. And that was difficult because I took myself out of my kind of out of the world. Like now all of a sudden, not only am I apart from people because I have this kid, but also we felt pretty strongly that if we were going to have boys, and it turned out a lot of boys, I have 4 boys, we needed a lot of space, and I wanted them to grow up like I did. So we have a lot of land and we have farm animals and the whole deal. And that is wonderful for them. But for me, it's very isolating. If I never had had children, I would be in the city. I would be working in politics or government. I would have a million, single and rich and interesting friends. And so this is one of the trade-offs that once you start thinking like, well, this is what I want for me. And when you're in your 20s or just starting your life, it really is kind of your identity is still you, and a family is kind of something you've decided to do. And as time goes on, and I would say the more children you have, the more your identity kind of bonds to your vocation. But that's a painful process. It doesn't feel good when that happens. It's a death of some sort. It's losing what you thought you were and stepping into an unknown. And when I was doing that, I was also just not great at being a mom, because my mother is extremely efficient. Like, she made a lot of food from scratch, and she kept a house sort of, but she worked full time, and that's a different model than the stay-at-home mom. My mom depended on my dad for if you ask her like, how do you potty train, she'd be like, I don't know, your father did all that. She doesn't. So I didn't have the kind of model that some of my friends who grew up Catholic in big families did. And so parenting turns out to be mostly second nature. So no matter what book you read or what you look into to think like, gosh, I'm going to do it better than my parents did, I'd like to change. You can change a few things. Like, I'm Catholic and my parents were not. My husband is very religious and my dad was not. You can change things, but it's going to be an unknown for you. And you are hobbling yourself in the sense that you're not able to just fall back on your second nature and just do kind of whatever you just without thinking, by instinct. So that combination of things, I sort of was thinking back to what that was like when I was a young woman, because I think a lot of women who are thinking about having large families or just prioritizing family are converts, or have at the very least have switched and would like to do something different than their parents did. And so the essay is sort of looking at that, and also the disconnect between the political right, the online right, Tradlife, all of that's spoken about and advocated online, and what it is in reality, and what the difficulties women in particular face when looking at that huge task, and thinking about, especially someone who didn't grow up with that, how few tools you have and how little confidence you have. And so that's sort of the background. So it all worked out. Spoiler alert, it all worked out. I'm really happy I did it all. And unfortunately, like, I had several friends be like, why didn't you, it's so sad, the essay, like, why didn't you put any solutions? And I said, well, I think it's important to state the problem. Like, it's important to give voice to reality, to what stops people from doing this. Because on paper, like I say in the article, it seems awesome to have, middle class, upper middle class woman, have your husband pay all your bills and you don't have to work, and what could be easier? It's terrifying. It's very difficult because it's different in kind than most of the things that we do growing up, especially middle class. Different than anything I did. I didn't have the tools necessary, and I didn't have the outlook that would have made me more courageous in approaching it. And so that's kind of where the article came from.
It is neither demonizing the tradwife lifestyle, if we're going to call it that, but nor is it glamourising it. And it's so rare, actually, to read someone doing neither of those things, which is like, which is the truer, that's the truth, right? That's where it actually
Yes,
sits if you're
yes.
living it
Um,
for real.
and I think, the trad, so much of that online is, it's just what people do. Like when you decide, like, okay, we're going to move to the country, you get on a million real estate websites and you follow a million people who do country life, and you immerse yourself in an idea, which is not bad. That's not bad, because most of what people don't realize is that what keeps people from doing things like that is not an intellectual problem. It's not a list of things you need to check off and figure out. It's your will. You have to, because it's terrifying to do something that you don't know how to do. And so all of those online trad accounts, even the far right men's, a lot of that is seeking to whet the appetite to get people to do something that in a similar way. When my husband and I decided, okay, we're going to move back home, I looked at land in the, Sonoma and like these beautiful places in California, because it was all more a dream. And at some point my husband was like, we're just going to live near one of our families. You just need to pick, like, it's either my family in Arizona or your family. We're not going to move 2 hours from your family just to say that we didn't move back home or make it more exotic than it is. So real life, the other reason that it's difficult to have a real life perspective is because it's so individualized. So one, it's been 10 or 15 years that everyone I've worked with has told me, oh, you should write about what people should do or how people should live. It's very difficult to write about that, because what you end up doing is so individualized. It's based on you and the job you want to have and the job your husband wants to have. It's based on the personalities of your children. It's based on the culture that you were grown up. So there, people get into these kind of narrow definitions of things because they think, well, I'm going to be a trad wife, or I'm going to be a rural, I'm going to do all this stuff, and that means I have to have a dairy cow. Obviously, that means I have to wear woolen clothes that are 100%. It's all, and they, because their experience is not there, they don't know which of these trappings are essential to the life and which of these are just trappings. And so it can be kind of a double-edged sword. Like it's good in that it makes you want it, but it's bad in that it unnecessarily limits the possibilities in your imagination. And there can be people, influencers, or different things online. You think, gosh, I like so much of this, but I really don't like that part. I really don't like this part of Well, most likely you don't have to do that, but people don't know until they do it. So yes, the article was intentionally not, I mean, all of that stuff, the mommy wars and the bashing stuff, is unnecessary. It comes out of a lack of confidence, which we all have. If once you get to the point where you're confident in what you're doing, you can allow others to be confident in what they're doing. Like, it's not a threat to you, right? Because you're happy and you figured your life out, and so this is one of the nice things about being older. There aren't it's you kind of relax, and what other people do that's different than what you're doing is interesting to you, and you're happy about it, because you don't want to just hear about yourself all the time. When you're in your 20s and 30s or just starting out, that lack of confidence and that lack of courage causes you to be threatened by people who do things that aren't exactly what you're doing or who are different. That doesn't last forever. But unfortunately, most of the writing and most of the money you can make in writing about those sorts of things, most of the market forces kind of stick there. And that's one of the reasons why, so much of the writing is kind of caustic. It's not, it's by design. It's also by market influence.
I've once heard someone say, and I thought this was such a great point. He was talking about his own wife, and he said, my wife feels as if she didn't really get to choose whatever setup she has, whether she's stay at home, part time, full time, whatever. She feels like she was forced into it by circumstances of various kinds. But she seems to assume that all of the other mums have chosen their whatever lifestyle they have, and like probably they feel just as restricted as everyone
Yes.
else,
Or she's
right?
comparing
and
herself to
and
men.
sometimes that,
Or she's comparing herself to men who, it
right,
is, I mean,
yeah,
biologically,
right,
it
yeah.
is a choice for men. That's a reality. Women, something coming from your body. It makes it easier for women in some ways. It's a gift. But when you're starting out, again, you're low on skills. The curve to competence, it takes a long time to get competent and feel good at it. But you cannot choose in most cases, you do not choose whether or not you're going to feel primarily responsible for that baby. It came from your body. Men, the best dads, my husband, they feel responsible for that baby, but it's a choice. It's a rational choice. And women, it's not. It's not. It is you are forced along. And once you're pregnant, that's going to happen. And like there's not like, do I still want to do it? I mean, obviously women can choose to terminate, but biology pushes us along in a way that it doesn't for men, and the workforce is, it's predominantly a male space, because I think, because by default, because biology is that way. And so when comparing myself to my husband, yeah, it seems like he has more choices, but I think he would say, well, to be a good man, I needed to choose that, right? But we don't choose, like, to be a good woman. I think there are a lot of moms who don't make that choice out of virtue, or like, what's the best, it's just like your friend, it's just kind of forced upon us. It happens. And then you deal with the consequences, I think. Yeah.
And there's almost always some degree of space to maneuver. I had Erica Commissar on the podcast recently. She's a child psychologist, and one of the things she's best known for is writing about the harm that daycare does to children. And it's quite a stressful experience listening to Erica if you are a working mother, even part-time, because what she says is basically daycare just is bad. Even small amounts of it, there, children do suffer stress from it and so on. And she says that really the only thing she can recommend is for yes, it is financially difficult, and this is something that you write about. And yes, there is less support available to the stay-at-home mum, etc., than there once was. But basically, like, be honest with yourself. Can you make it work? Can you find a more flexible job? Can you move somewhere cheaper? Can you have fewer holidays
Or
and
even
fewer
just, can
expensive
you
things?
try to make it work? You don't know if
Yeah,
it's going to
yeah,
work. Can you try and see?
yes,
Yes,
exactly.
yes.
And the answer in many cases is probably yes. Like, if we can be completely realistic, I think most mums probably could find a way of certainly not having to do the, like, full-time city job or whatever, right? And yet so many mums don't want to. And this is a question that you ask, and I think it's a really important question to ask, given the pressure on women from in conservative spaces to do the trad wife thing. Why don't women want to? Are there good reasons why women wouldn't want to, even if they could potentially afford it? And I think the answer is
There are very
yes.
good
There
reasons.
are some
And
good reasons.
increasingly more and
Yeah.
more. I mean, so there, okay, so in the article, there are two things that are sort of stepping out into the unknown for most women. One is being a stay-at-home mom, and that's what you're talking about, just taking care of your young children, as opposed to hiring it out so that you can work, or just so that you don't have to have the majority of the childcare burden on you. And then the other one is whether you should send them to school. And in America, these two things are very tend to be sort of connected, because the school system, doesn't matter what school that you're talking about, even private schools in most places, the schools are so much worse than they were when we grew up, that increasingly people look into kind of having one spouse not work in order to provide many things that society used to provide for parents. The situation is so bad that people, I think if I'm honest, I think most middle class, upper middle class people look at the schools and say, I can't think about it too much. That's what everyone's doing, is just trying not to think about it too much, especially post COVID, because it's so bad. Everybody knows that it's bad. My mom taught in a public high school for 40 years. It was starting to get really bad by the time she got retired, maybe 2010, 2011. My sister's a teacher, several educators in my family. It's really bad. And it's gotten to the point where it's accelerating in its decline. So for a long time, it just sort of sank. Now it's a snowball. And so those two things are connected, and there are very, very good reasons for really well-meaning normal people to be apprehensive about taking that on. In some ways, in some ways you can't take it on. It's impossible, right? Like that's one of the things that my husband and I have to remind ourselves of all the time. He went to the biggest high school in Phoenix, Arizona, and played. Well, in California we call it Division One. I think it's switched there. So the largest division, sports division. He played football, wrestled, really good athlete, did all this stuff. The math, I had just this tiny little small town public high school, and our math and science department was good, so good that I was ahead of a lot of private school kids when I went to my private college. Um, so we had a really good education. Even then there were cracks, but we had really good education. We cannot provide that for our children. We just can't do it. So it doesn't exist anymore. So some of what, I didn't touch on this in the article, but some of what people are grappling with is just the loss of their expectation, the inability to give your kids even what you had. And once you,
Downward social
yeah, and once
mobility,
you, well, maybe
essentially. Yeah.
that's the thing. It is downward social mobility, maybe, but that doesn't take into account how much BS there is in this, like in some ways, yes, I can't give my children what I had. However, the education that I'm giving them in many ways is superior, especially this straight up studying. But the academics and the community and everything that school was other than academics, it's very difficult to replace. We do our best, but I don't blame people for being intimidated and just not wanting to look at that reality. It's really depressing. And if you could just put, you think like, well, I live in a slightly better area than my parents, it'll be fine. These schools are good. That's what people say. The schools are really good. The schools are good. And it's all of the parents are sort of like engaged in this hallucination or this mutual, oh, they're good. If we just don't think about it, they're good. And some schools are okay in some ways, but it's not, the great inflation and the testing, it's not, they don't have what we had. And we certainly don't have what my mother had at Berkeley Public High School in the 60s, where she had a million different instruments. And I mean, the level of education there, public school for my mom, the boomer generation, is amazing. We don't have anything like that. It's that world is gone. So it's a mixture of courage and also the ability to allow yourself to realize and sit with really depressing truths. And that's before you get into the nuts and bolts of just what you're talking about, how to make it work, how the logistics of it, how to pay for it, how to do all those things. One of the things that I think about all the time in terms of the conservative movement in America is that it doesn't require conservative temperaments anymore. It requires rebellious temperaments. It requires people who are who are comfortable being founders and pioneers, and are not have some. I mean, my husband and I are both this way. We kind of have a sick delight in not doing what our parents did or what people expect us to do. We enjoy being counter cultural and when you do things like raise your kids on land in the middle of nowhere, or, I mean, we're not in the middle of nowhere, but it's rural. I mean, and you homeschool or you stay home with them, you're not doing what people expect. And you are constantly, your peers or your former peers are constantly, goading you and teasing you, or just trying to figure out why you're doing that. When people step out of the norm, it's natural that other people would say, like, how's that going? Or another example, many of my conservative friends leave California because they don't think California is sufficiently conservative. My husband and I refuse to do that. I don't, we get a lot of feedback. There's a lot of negative things if you're a conservative and you stay in California. Like, it's just so we're not a conservative movement anymore. We're not conservating anything because everything's gone. It's all gone. So we're rebellious. We're not, our movement is not, what we do is not based on valuing the past or giving honor to to what came before, really, unless you leap back, to some idea, which,
Yeah, certainly not
and
the
that's another
recent
problem with
past. Yeah.
Tradlife, is they don't have any experience of what they're saying they want to be. It's all a projection because no one remembers. That's all generations past. So it's made up. It's kind of like it's it's a worshipfulness of something that none of us has any idea. So it's absurd in some ways. But the situation as a parent, that's I mean, that's what you'll run up against unless you're just really lucky and you have an amazing school, amazing community, but there aren't many, you know. The ones that do exist are so expensive. I don't know. Yeah. So yeah.
I think one of the answers, right, that you offer, and I agree with you as to why actually in a lot of cases, despite all the mum guilt, despite all the expense, etc., it can be easier to choose the conformist option, to choose work and daycare and living in the city, and despite all the stress, it can be the more attractive option because it's the normal option, because people aren't going to rag on you as you describe. It doesn't require a leap of faith. It doesn't have the same risks, whatever. um that doesn't mean that the other option isn't available. It's just that the other
The
option is
other option is
scary.
scary. I honestly, so I'm very, my mom, I said I moved back home. My mom lives 5 minutes away. She worked her whole life. She had 4 kids, so she was not super, but my mom would say that I chose the better and easier path. And I don't have any experience with her, but I think that that's actually correct. It actually is easier to do it, to go, to follow your instinct. And I don't want to say that it's best in every situation to stay home or to not that simply isn't the case. There are some situations where you have a good school or where you have enough family around to help you. I've worked most of my marriage part-time most of the time, but I have worked full-time. Starting when the pandemic started, my husband was vice president of a furniture manufacturing company, and they made furniture for hotels and conference centers and large gatherings, and that immediately died. So I think he was employed, and then we thought, well, we have to jump ship. Like, this is not going to recover for. I don't think it has recovered still. Maybe just now they're starting to recover, but we knew, the writing was on the wall there. So at the same time, an old friend reached out and asked me if I wanted to work as an editor for American Greatness. And so I worked full time for 3 years, when the pandemic started. I recently resigned due to some just artistic differences, and I wanted to write more on my own. But I don't ever want to say that something is definitely right for, because it's all the realm of prudence. It has to do with what you have to work with and who you are. But I think that you're right that daycare is. I would say that's not as good as, obviously, as being with your mom, being with your parents, being with someone who loves you, not being a face in the crowd, not being a number. It's so how do we reconcile these things? Again, I think courage is the main thing. I think if most people could just suspend giving into fear and try it, they would find it's not as scary as it seems. And also, they would find that the kind of person you have to be to raise your own children, and then especially to educate your own children. I think that most people will find that is a creativity and an individuality that is necessary. It doesn't seem like that because you don't do these things for the world. You do it primarily for your family. Although, as my kids get older, we've been community building the whole time. There are many families that have moved here because we were here. We've built up a whole community. Our parish is full of young families. So there is some outward facing, but for the most part, it's hidden because it's for your own family, and people don't see the creativity involved. But it's much more fulfilling just in an artistic, creative way, because you really are, because of the opposite of what you just said. You're not following some current. You're not just doing what everyone else does without thinking. You have to think about a lot of elements of your life, which is fatiguing, but it makes you, I think, a more interesting person in some ways, because you've decided, well, I'm going to do this and not this, or we tried this and it didn't work, so I'm going to do this. Your mind is engaged in your life. You're intentionally painting a picture that is and it's usually the woman is figuring out how all this works. And I think I have hobbies and things that I've gotten good at that I don't think, had I worked full time and done the regular thing, I don't think I would have had time for. I don't think I would have been able to kind of had the freedom, especially as my kids were getting older, you get into things that you can do around the house, or, like gardening or different things that I wouldn't have done. I wouldn't have figured out, I think. And so there are things that are unseen that you don't realize before getting into it. You see the downsides I think are obvious. The differences with what you know are obvious. The goods are hidden, which is which is just the case for many things, right? I mean, that's sort of a theme in life, certainly in religion. Like, the goods are hidden, so it just it's very understandable that women do not choose to stay home and raise their own children. And several of my siblings, several of my friends put their kids in daycare and regular school. There are problems there. They deal with the problems just like I deal with the problems that come up with homeschooling. I mean, there are downsides. I like my downsides better than their downsides, but there are downsides, like there.
I like my
Yeah, I mean,
downsides better is I think, yeah, that's the thing to
I think
aspire
so.
to,
I don't
isn't it? Um,
know.
yeah. Just thinking about the like what feels possible, right? For people, if you because there's been, for so many people, in not just in America, everywhere, there's been this kind of fire break between the older way of doing things. You said, no one knows what the past is like. Like, yes, I mean, we don't, right? There's these, no, unless you sort of make a concerted effort to study it, and even then, you're obviously learning through a
Well,
book
and
what
everyone
you might
everyone thinks
historically
they
have
would have
learned.
been aristocracy had we lived in the no one's looking back to being the scullery
Right,
maid in
yeah.
olden times.
I was just talking to a friend about this morning. We were talking about like
Hmm.
Victorian
Hmm.
intellectual ladies and whatever, and she was like, "Come on, babe, we'd have both been chambermaids."
You'd be
Yeah,
running
I
from the
suppose that's
master of the
true.
house and
Um,
dealing with his advances, and oh, it would be a mess. Yeah.
right, yeah,
Hmm.
the odds are not great. But so like no one has this like visceral understanding of the traditional ways of doing things, unless you come from some kind of cultural tradition that has been preserved. There aren't that many of those. So for most people, there's some kind of fire break. You kind of have to learn it from scratch, or learn it from, like, literally learn it from
Yeah.
YouTube.
Yeah.
Right, like, which is actually an amazing resource
It
for things
is
like
absolutely. Yeah.
crafting skills, all these women's skills that haven't necessarily been passed down directly. um and just thinking about the like tradwife social media. Tradwife social media gets a lot of hate. I was thinking of, can you remember the name of the lady who was Mrs.
Yes. Hannah
America, and
Hannah
she
Needleman.
lives on Ballerina
Hannah
Farm? Hannah
Needleman. Yeah, we
Hannah Needleman.
my female,
Right.
my editor,
There
my
was like
female
a
editors and I have constant conversation. She's so fascinating. But yes, yeah. Hmm.
She is, yeah, right. Well, there was a hit
Yeah.
piece against her in Vice.
Yes.
Did you
Hmm.
read recently? And it was all set up as like taking down ballerina farm lady. And I read it, and it was like thousands and thousands of words. It was really long. And I got to the end, and I was like, "Where's the big revelation?" So the big revelation in this hit piece is that her husband actually
Oh
earns
yeah, they're
a lot of
filthy
money.
rich. Well,
So
but anyone who understands,
right.
anyone who knows anything about stoves could see that August stove in her house and be like, "There's money here, right?" Like,
Right,
you know,
right. So she has a
the
very
the stove
expensive
isn't
oven as like
whittled
the
out of
main sort
driftwood,
of,
right?
yes.
Like they bought that, and they have, so
Right.
yes. And also it's evident from her minimalist lifestyle. People with money can afford minimalism. People without money keep everything because they might need it. So when you see those kind of spare interiors, that's money. That's money. That's not
Right, right.
simplicity.
Yes. But then but then I also thought, reading it, I was like, well, yeah, social media is full of lies. I mean, I was expecting like she has an army of nannies
No,
behind the
I don't think
screen
she
or something. Like,
does. Yeah,
that's
I
not,
think
I
she
don't
does it.
think, true. I think
Yeah.
she does, she
Hmm.
she does it all. She's got 7 kids, close age gaps, home births, like the whole crunchy setup. And she must work really hard despite her
Yes, I
husband's
think he works
money.
hard too.
And
I mean, I have rich
I'm
friends
sure
that
he
go back to
does.
the
And they
land.
do they do literally
Yeah,
have a
yeah,
farm.
yeah. I think he
Yeah,
works hard too.
right. Yeah. And their lifestyle must be, even if they have loads of money, their lifestyle must be a hell of a lot cheaper than it would be if they lived in
Yes,
Manhattan, which is their other like
yes.
possible route
Hmm.
they had available to them, right? Because they live in Utah, is that
I think
right?
that's right. They are, and in
Somewhere
general, the
like that.
Mormons, they're
Yeah.
Mormon, and the Mormons are not fakers when it comes to a lot of this stuff because their religion, I believe, dictates or requires that they have stores of food and stuff. So all of that kind of preservation and the cooking, that's all very much part of the culture. They're not faking that. So I think that's all wrapped up in there. Yeah.
So she obviously attracts a lot of hate for basically posting nice pictures of the bread she makes with her kids. And like, fine, it's a bit fake. Like,
I think if
what a surprise.
honestly, I
Instagram
think
is
if she were
fake.
a little dumpy physically, people wouldn't hate her as much. She's
Well, she's
so
Mrs. America. That's her whole
beautiful.
thing.
Well,
She's
she's a ballerina and
gorgeous.
she has one of those bodies that are
Right.
like 1 out of 1 million that just retains that tiny frame no matter what is she on, like her eighth or ninth. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so
And she
right,
snaps back
much
every
of the
time she has a
hatred
baby. And
actually has
yeah.
a pretty understandable
Right.
source.
Right, right, right. But then I sort of think, look, she's making she's making a particular lifestyle glamorous in a way that it was not glamorous, I would say, maybe a couple of decades ago. I don't think that these trad influencers are a new phenomenon. And I think, yes, her life in some senses is unattainable, but her life is a lot more attainable than like Kim
Or
Kardashian's
just any,
life or whatever.
yes,
Like,
yes, that's
actually,
right.
like rural lots
Hmm.
of kids' life is looks like more women's
Yes, I mean
lives than what you would normally
most of
see
the
on
movies
Instagram.
growing up, when I was growing up in the 90s, featured women, girl boss women with amazing corporate jobs, real high up. And that's also unattainable for most people. Statistically, it's very unlikely that you're going to dedicate yourself your entire life to a job that is in any way glamorous, in any way. You're gonna do some drudgery. Most people do really boring jobs that a million other people could instantly replace them. It's very rare for any worker to be irreplaceable and have the type of job that really like no one but you can do. And usually in media, there, it's an artistic, there'll be a magazine editor, or there'll be, whatever. We have millions of examples of art that shows the ideal of that. And Ballerina Farm is art. She's an artist. It's art. It's not, people shouldn't think, it's not, reality TV was never real, but it's an art form of showing a very beautiful stylized version of that life. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's what art does. It turns the will to make you desire something that's not immediately um familiar to you. But
Right. And I think that's what she's doing is is good, is that she is offering an
right.
alternative dream
Yes. I think all of these,
to the girl boss
it's
dream.
not, I mean, I guess it could be good or bad if they're encouraging people to just destroy their lives and ruin all of their relationships. But most of these things are neither good nor bad. They just are. They're art. There's something that, they're someone giving their perspective on usually on Instagram on a type of a way of living or a type of living, and I think people are silly to get caught up in it like it's prescriptive or like it's something that you have to be. They get confused because it engages their desire and their will, and so they think the artist is creating that mandatory, like, you must be this way, and it doesn't need to be. I mean, again, like, she can be what she is and we can appreciate the beauty of what she's creating without having it say things to us necessarily about what we're doing in our life. I don't know. I have friends who aren't on social media at all because they find it, I think this is a personality thing. Some people are not encouraged by other women and their beautiful lives on Instagram. I think the fakeness, but they can't separate themselves out of it to where, I guess, I have a couple of friends who think everyone who posts anything on social media is bragging, is saying like, look at me, I'm doing this. And there certainly is some of that. But I think that attitude misses the artistry of it. It's natural for an artist to like, that's what it's like, look at this. That's what they're saying. Look at this, look at this, look at this. And I think there's value just in what these people are contributing. It is a modern art form, and it's obviously not reality. And I think I would never I follow the most unbelievable social media is amazing because you can follow interior designers, you can follow that girl in Manhattan with the perfect job, you can follow the farm, it's amazing the amount of content we're able to see of again, idealized, but these different forms of life. I think in some ways that, I guess that contributes to the difficulty young women face, because they have all these examples, and they, I guess when you're younger and you're inexperienced, you can think like, well, I have to do one of these. Most of us will just do something kind of drab and boring and not as exotic. But I think I think her art is beautiful. I think her animal life is beautiful. You know, I my sister has a milk cow named Daffodil. Just like, I make fun of her all the time. She didn't name it, but I was like, "Oh, Daffodil, like Ballerina Farm." She's like, "I didn't name it. She came with that name." I make fun of her all the time. Mm.
You know what? I'm going to make a full-throated defense of Ballerina Farm, which is that it is so rare to see motherhood represented as being that high status. It is so rare. And even if so much of the status that she attracts is due to her beauty and being Mrs. America and whatever, right? And apparently having a rich husband. Although, to be fair to them, they don't the rich husband is a
Yes,
secret.
that's
Normally the
not
rich
put
husband on
out there,
Instagram
right?
is the main thing.
No, I mean,
Right. Like, whereas here
right.
it's
She's running
actually
that show. I mean, he does a lot of stuff with the animals and stuff, but she is very much. I mean, you just can't have. I know from experience, although I don't have as much land or animals as she does, but you can't run that kind of a deal without both spouses doing it. I mean, it's not possible unless you hire a lot of help.
right. So I think, yeah, which I mean maybe they do
Yeah,
have
but to
farmhands or
your point,
whatever.
it's
But
not put out there as look how rich we are. You know, it's that's not the brag.
yeah, no, the brag is I've had loads of kids. I love my kids. I've devoted my life to domesticity. And that is so rare to see that being boasted about. And this is a point, of course, that you make in your Mother's Gauntlet piece, which is that for all of the efforts of, you will fairly often hear conservative men uh, praising the stay at home mother. What you more rarely hear is like real status conferred on the stay-at-home mother, and the real recognition of how difficult it is, and not just difficult in the drudgery way, difficult in the, well, as you say, the self-governance way, the fact that it's all on you, and there is so much responsibility, and it really is the hardest job in the world, and you you just that doesn't attract the status that it
Right.
ought to
And any
attract.
normal person, particularly if you're a woman who's ambitious, I always had a lot of ambition. I always wanted to strive and do whatever is the hardest, most honorable thing. Like I wanted to do that, right? Which can get you into trouble, but because when no one's applauding, you're like, why, what is my motivation? But I will say this is something I've been thinking about. I should write on probably, but my experience, and this might just be where I'm from, but my experience is that there's almost nothing as low status as the young mom with one, two, especially when you really get going. You have like three kids. People will crucify you in this grocery store, whatever. They will just make your life a living hell. They love, it's like hens. It's hen pecking. It's usually older women, and they just say whatever they can to make you feel horrible. That could just be an America thing, a culture thing. We have some different things going on with the generations here, possibly. But what I've noticed is that, and this hits on your podcast and my Substack um, name of, Matriarch. When you get a little bit older and it's clear your kids are not a disaster, that really changes.
The episode is not over. There is another maybe 30 minutes of content, but it is behind a paywall. If you would like access to that content, if you would like to show support for the show, paid subscriptions are what keep it on the road. Allow me to pay my producers, put food on the table, all that important stuff. The extended version of the podcast is available at my Substack, louiseperry.substack.com. That's where you can also find, as I say every week, bonus episodes, extended episodes, the MMM chat community, all of this. Please sign up for a paid subscription. It makes such an enormous difference to my ability to keep producing the podcast and grow it even bigger, produce more episodes, all that good stuff. There are other ways that you can show your support for the show as well. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. You can like us on YouTube. You can tell your friends and family how much you like the show. If you find it valuable, all of these things make an enormous difference to our ability to keep making it. Thank you so much.